Hello and welcome to the Addicts Anonymous podcast. I'm your host, Jamar. Today's episode 141, and we're going to be interviewing Will R. How are you doing, Will?
I'm doing good, sir. Thanks for having me on.
No, I'm excited for this. I'm glad to have you. So let's dive in and get started. Tell me about your childhood.
Well, I was born to teenage parents. My mother was 16. My father had just turned 18 when I was born, from a little small town with one red light over in Central Florida-ish area. And it was, going as far back as I can remember, it was chaos. My mother came from a family of lifelong alcoholics. She was one of seven children that my grandmother and grandfather had. By the time I was three, I want to say, my mom and dad had moved to Oklahoma with me. We had my younger sister there. My dad had went to an aeronautics school in Oklahoma, and I don't have many memories of early childhood that were good or bad. I remember growing up while we were in Oklahoma. It was odd that I remember this, but my mother and father would allow me to go to church they would show up in the school bus and she would let me go as a 3-year-old. And I find that as a parent today, I find that just insane that she would just let me go with basically strangers. That was a memory that I heard, and we'll get to some of that too, kind of like where my recovery journey has went through that. Another memory I had when I was about 3-4 years old, we had what we call a captain's bed. It was like a really tall bed, and my father was he was an auto mechanic during the day, so he was getting ready to go to work, and I was standing on top of the bed, leaning out, looking through the window, and I had fallen, and the blinds had caught me, and I was hanging there, basically, choking. And my mother come running in, and she grabbed me and saved me, and I remember it like it was yesterday, and she gave me a spanking. And years later, I would ask, like, why would you do that? She was like, that I didn't know another response, and so that was kind of like early childhood. By the time I started kindergarten, we had moved back to Florida. We were living in Jacksonville, Florida at the time. And it was, a lot of, my dad always worked. I love my dad. I love my mom too, but she was the alcoholic, and that would progress over the years to where she, from alcohol to pills to struggling heavily with mental illness. And my father always worked, and he always did what we needed to do we had shelter, we had food, we had clothes, but he also made mom had what she needed to keep her addictions fed. And growing up, I can't count the number of times that the police would come to the house, or there would be fights and plates break in, and it was just throughout. Those are the memories that I have of my childhood, of just toxic chaos.
Do you think that's why you don't have memories of your earlier childhood? Do you think maybe you kind of blacked it out?
I think so, because there's, I'm 3 years older than my sister. So as I kind of get into my early teenage years, and she was coming out of that early adolescence, there are things that I remember that she doesn't, and things that she remembers that I don't. And we both kind of had those same experiences, but how we, I guess, process them was different. So I definitely think there's a lot of suppression that had happened. And over the years, there have been things through my recovery walk where I would get a glimpse of a memory and was able to kind of work through that and process it, and don't really have full grasp of the whole event, but I did see things that kind of gave me an aha moment as so this is probably why I have this behavior, or this is why I feel this way about a certain thing, because it was just things that pop up over the years.
So how was your social life growing up? Did you have friends? Were you a popular guy or?
Yeah, not really. I mean, we moved around. We stayed in the general area, but just say like elementary schools, for example. I went to 5 different elementary schools. We lived in multiple different parts of town. There was a period of time where our parents had separated, so there was kind of that. The weekends I was with dad, and then I was with mom other days. So I never really had a neighborhood friends that you would grow up in. And by the time we finished up one school year, I'm in another school, and it was a lot of starting over again. And that was that was a little rough, because there was, my mother, she was a day drinker, she was a night drinker. It was just a constant thing. So she had this fear of the outside world. And even when we lived in a place that you would have considered safe to be able to go out and play, wasn't allowed to do that. So we were very much confined, in our home, eyesight, and never really, played as a kid. If sounds crazy to even say it now, and I've told the story 100 times, but we just weren't allowed to do that. Didn't really start to experience some normalcy in my childhood until I started the 6th grade. We had moved. My parents had gotten back together, and we were renting a house for a while. And then there was an opportunity where my dad could buy the house. So this was like a big deal. We spent a lot of time in apartments or trailer parks, and now we're in this, nice neighborhood, suburban. Had some stability. So then I was a little older, and there was I remember there were the Morgans. They lived 2 houses down. They had a basketball goal on the street, and they just invited all the neighborhood kids were able to come over there and play. And it was like a perfect location to play basketball because it was right next to a street light. So we could play until 10, 11 o'clock at night. And that was kind of like my first opportunity to be out and engage with other people outside of the house. And it was also good because there was a lot of times where the inside of the home was just toxic. And so I didn't have to experience it because I was able to get out some. So that was around 6th grade. Kind of the same. It was the same. How do I want to work? And completely disrespectful of my parents. It was just toxic. You would have seasons where it was okay and it was tolerable, and then there would be, mom would drink, and then there would be that night where she'd want another bottle, and dad would try to put his foot down and say no, we're not getting any more. So then she'd try to get into the car and drive, and then that would kind of set off another season of, it was just, heavy consumption, heavy toxicity, and then it would kind of slow down, and then it would pick back up again. And it was just this repeated cycle of just unhealthy behavior over and over and over again.
And this affected you probably quite a bit.
Heavily affected me, but to a point where I didn't realize it until I was later in life. So I was, around 13 or so, I was still trying to struggling to fit in. So I'd gotten, started smoking a little weed, and was selling more than I was smoking because I didn't really care for it a whole lot. But
Who was the first time? What was the first time that you ever did a drug?
The first time I ever smoked weed, I was right before I turned 13. So it was in the summer from in between 6th grade and 7th grade. And there were some older kids that were a couple years older that we'd play basketball with, and then they were going to go play basketball in the neighborhood next door, and I went with them, and one thing led to another, and now you're here, and trying to fit in, and why not?
The first time, how did it make you feel?
I went to sleep. I went to sleep. the first time I just went to sleep, and the second time we went back to the same place, and everybody was doing it. And there was another group of people that were there. So this was like the neighborhood, this was the neighborhood drug house. Like everybody just hung out there. It was a place that as a parent now, I would never allow my kids to go. But there was a group there they weren't just smoking weed. They were also taking acid. And there was one guy in particular that had it hit him the wrong way. And he was running through the house and hiding in the closet with a big old cleaver. And he thought somebody was trying to get him. Like it was scary. So I'm like 2 times high on weed. First time I'd fallen asleep. So I'm just in a whole nother level of like, what is going on here? And so I was like, what is wrong with that guy? And they're like, oh, well, he just, he's having a bad trip. And like, okay, well, whatever he did, I don't want anything to do with that ever. So that was probably a saving grace for me, because I would later in life realize that I just like doing things that I wasn't supposed to do. But that experience really kept me from some of that crazy stuff. But yeah, so I think that was kind of like my early high school experience was a lot of the same way. I'd kind of gotten to a place where I had a reputation. My name, is William. A lot of people called me Willie. So I had this nickname of Willie Weed for a long time, and sometimes bad attention is good when you're kind of starving to be involved with something, be connected with something. And so I just embraced it and kind of continued to go on down that path. And kind of took a break from it when I was 16. I had another group of friends. They were going to a little small church in our area, so I started hanging out with them. Even though I didn't come from a background of, my parents never went to church or anything like that, I had a little more freedom when I would tell, my mother and my father, I was like, hey, I'm going to go to church with these guys. So I was able to have, I could get in a car and just go just because of what I said I was going to do. And kind of had a real tight group of people, and things I had kind of moved. I still had like the reputation of being the guy that was, playing with weed, but never, I kind of got away from it. And
why do you think you got away from it?
Like I've got in a place where I was having real community, real friendships. I started to see that there were people in this world that did not grow up like I did. Like there were people that had parents who were healthy, who genuinely were concerned about them from a healthy place. And these people, inevitably they were strangers. They kind of like took me in. And I was, part of their family. I mean, just yesterday, I went to the 50th wedding anniversary of one of my friend's parents from that time period, because they were so instrumental in my life, and they cared about me in a way that they didn't have to. And I didn't, and I wanted to please them. Like I wanted to be. I wanted to be good. I wanted to, and I would get affirmation from them. And so I think that was why it was just a different experience. You saw people they were far from perfect, but they were genuinely happy. They had a joy that I had not experienced. And now I'm, 16, almost 17 years old, and they had it. So I really just immersed myself into their life. And they embraced me and took me in it. And it was good for a season. And right towards the end of my senior year in high school. And see, that was the thing. Like I always said that I would never drink. I would never drink because of what I had experienced growing up. And there was a time I was involved with the church, and we were getting ready. We had raised up a bunch of money and we're going to go to Disney. We're going to go on this youth group trip. And I had came home from school that afternoon, and it was the weekend before we were supposed to leave. And my mother was hammered, and she said something to me. I don't even remember exactly what it was to this point, but she said something to me and I didn't like it. And I told her, shut up. And she threw the church thing at me. And she's like, oh, that's what they're teaching you at the church you're going to. And it just turned into this thing. And I was getting a glass of ice water. I was getting ice out of our refrigerator. And she went from behind me and tried to kick me. And like, I grabbed her leg and I'm like, don't kick me. You know, what are you doing? And, so they forbid me to go. I was not allowed to go on this trip that I was involved with. And my dad came home and he was like, needed to defend the honor of his bride or something. I don't know. Yeah, it was just like, it was a mess. It turned into this thing. And that really just kind of just pushed me. For years, I blamed them. But it gave me the excuse just to say, you know what, like, if you can't beat them, you might as well join them. And as soon as I got off of being grounded, I went to a party and I had my first drink. And when I didn't have my first drink. I had my first lots of drinks. I had I think everybody, you had that one other parent. So like on this side, I had the parents that were, they were going to church and helping encourage you to do the right thing. And then I had this other parent who all you had to do was just show up and you could take her to the liquor store and she'd buy you whatever you wanted. And so I went there and she bought me a pint of Jack Daniels, and I drank the pint and then went back about 3 or 4 hours later, and then went and got, a case of beer, and it was just, I was good at it. And it was, again, now I had another like claim to fame because everybody knew I had never drank. And now I'm at this party and I'm drinking and I just drink all this alcohol and I was functioning and I was having a good time and everything was cool. And I just stayed in it. That was my new badge of honor, was the guy who could drink a lot and still be the life of the party. And
what did it do for you when you first drank? What was the effects?
And when I first started drinking, I was really happy. I was really happy-go-lucky. Like really, I don't want to say reserved because I was more outgoing, but I was able to, at least how I envisioned myself was, I was obviously, my inhibitions were relaxed, but I was just able to kind of engage with people in a way that I was not ever really able to engage with them before. And had a lot of, I love you, man, those deep midnight, conversations.
Yeah.
And it just felt really connected to people in a way that I was not able to connect before. And the only thing that I could equate the difference to was before I drank, or now I drank, and before I didn't. But yeah, that just set it off to a couple years of pretty regularly. If I wasn't, I'd graduate high school, and I had a job, and I was working, and the guy I worked with, he would stop every Friday, was payday, and he would go. He was a raging alcoholic. He drank Wild Turkey like it was Gatorade. So he would go and get. He'd go get him a couple of bottles, and he'd get me one, and that was the thing. Come Friday night till I went back to work on Monday, I just drank and drank and drank. And finally ended up joining the military a year after high school. I had a buddy of mine who was in the Marines, and he had came home from boot camp. And so we were having a party, and he was telling me all about it. And I was I made the decision to join the Marines while I was heavily intoxicated, because that's when you make most of your important life decisions. So I went to the recruiter's office. Was still lit. The recruiter was like, "You've been drinking?" And I was like, "Oh, well, yesterday." He's like, "Come back tomorrow when you're sober and let's talk." So I went back to the recruiter's office and signed up on Mother's Day this was completely a coincidence. I didn't do this on purpose, but Mother's Day, 1998 was the day that I left to go to boot camp. And then at that point, that was the first time that I had more than probably about 3 or 4 days dry in almost a year and a half, 2 years from when I had first started drinking. Went 3 months, couldn't drink. That was part of the thing. Did really well in boot camp. I got meritoriously promoted at the end of our boot camp cycle. Came home for leave after boot camp and, picked it right back up and, started partying again. Eventually got to my, to my duty station. And for me, like, now I can go back and I can look at my story and I can see different events where, like, I do not believe that I would be where I'm at today if I did not have my relationship with God, if I did not have a regular, conversation with Jesus throughout the course of my day now. Because I can look back at things and events that happened and see where I do believe he was calling me and he was trying to protect me from myself. And I would deny that protection, if that makes sense. The first night I got to my permanent duty station, I was in what they call the receiving barracks. And I was in this barracks, there's 400 beds in it, but I'm in there all by myself. And it was a Wednesday night, and a couple of the Marines that were stationed there already, they were a little older. They came to the receiving barracks and they're just wearing regular clothes. I had no idea who they were at the time. And they invited me to go to church. And I said, no, I'm good. I'm just going to rest. And, I'm going to get picked up and go to my command tomorrow. And I'm fine. They're like, "Are you sure?" And they were talking to me, trying to share the gospel with me. And, I'd been to church, before, so I knew everything. I didn't really want to talk to them. So I was just kind of like, "Yeah, man, I'm good. And there's no problem. Everything's fine. Yeah, I'm good. I'm just going to rest tonight." And the last thing he said to me before they left was, "Are you sure you don't want to go with us tonight?" He said, "Because this can be a very evil place if you're not careful." And I said, "Nah, everything's fine. No problem." So I stay, went to sleep. Next day I get up, get picked up. I go to my command. I get issued my barracks, and one of my corporals that were in my specific unit had came by to make sure we were getting all squared away, and I got my stuff put in the room. And he's like, "Hey, do you drink?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, "All right, well, when you get finished here, come downstairs." I said, "But I'm not 21 yet." He said, "No, it doesn't matter. Just come on downstairs." So like on Wednesday night, I had people trying to take me to come to church with them. And I'm like, "No, I'm good." And then Thursday afternoon, I have, somebody offering me a drink. And I said, "Yeah." And that was it. It was the lifestyle. I mean, everybody has the traditions of the Marines. We were, born in a bar, and it's just part of the lifestyle. And truly, I mean, it really was part of what we did. We would work hard, train hard, get done, and then drink every single day. If we weren't deployed or in the field or whatever, that's just what we did. Pretty regularly.
Do you feel they encouraged you, I guess, because the other guys were drinking? Do you think that helped progress your actual addiction problems?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because it wasn't a problem. It wasn't a problem because everybody did it. And it was just part of the routine. Like it was just as normal as getting up, brushing your teeth, and going for a 3-mile run every day. Like that was just the the part of the process of what we did and how we did it. And we would see guys, the only time that it was a problem was when somebody couldn't control it, right? And I put that in quotation marks. We had a guy who had, he'd went out, he was heavily intoxicated, he got in a crash, busted up his face, and he was now the example of what not to do. And it was never, it's like, if you're not 21, don't drink, right? That was what the leadership would say. And if you don't have a plan in place to do the right thing, whatever, to take a cab, have somebody drive you, then this is what you're going to be, and they showed this guy. I mean, he had just gotten out of the hospital, he's in the middle of this big formation. His head's all swollen up from his injuries. So even when it was a problem, it wasn't communicated like it was a problem. It was just be smarter so you don't end up like this guy. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they didn't offer you any addiction support or resources.
Correct. There wasn't. So that was 1998. August of 2000. I had been in for a couple of years now. Things were just kind of going along, and I ended up being that guy. I was had a friend of mine. He lived out in town. I'd go to his house on the weekends. We would have a barbecue. We were drinking, and when I would go there, his wife would take my keys because she knew that I was the guy who liked to go for a ride after he had some. And so she took my keys. Somehow, to this day, I don't remember what happened, but I would wake up 3 days later in a hospital. I had found the keys. I had gotten in my car, and I was on a back road somewhere in North Carolina. I couldn't find it today if I had to. The road made a sharp left curve, and I went head first into a culvert.
Into a what?
A big concrete culvert, a ditch.
Okay.
So a car went down off and hit the concrete drainage ditch, and my face hit the steering wheel, broke my jaw in 3 places. They say I woke up 3 days later, in the hospital. Luckily, I was blessed, nothing too serious. Because of the circumstances that happened in that moment, I didn't really even get in trouble for that, because they had to transport me from one hospital to another hospital and all of that. They never took a BAC. So I had gotten charged with a reckless driving, which was nothing in comparison to what it could have been. So I ended up having to, pay a ticket, never lost my license. I didn't really get any significant consequences for that. My command knew. They assumed that I was drinking, but they couldn't prove it. So they did force me to go to what they called extensive outpatient alcohol therapy. So for 5 days, for 8 hours a day, I went to counseling.
So the military provided that?
They did. I had no choice.
That's not bad. That sounds like a good thing.
Yes, it would have been a good thing if I would have embraced it as a resource that was helpful and not as a punishment.
Okay. I understand that.
Yeah.
It's all based on your perspective at the time.
Absolutely. I still did not have a problem. It was just something that happened. And some way I justified my lack of problem with, I didn't get in trouble, right? If I would have gotten in trouble, then I could probably make the case that I had a problem, but I didn't. So I didn't have a problem. But the reality is I'm eating, blended macaroni and cheese because my mouth was wired shut for 30 days. I couldn't eat solid food. And 4 days after getting out of the hospital with my jaw wired shut, couldn't eat solid food, I'm still standing at the barracks, drinking beer. It's insane to go back and think about it, so I'm on these painkillers. I'm drinking beer, and it's just starting, like it's already spiraling out of control. It's just now it's like I'm walking evidence that there is a problem with this guy. Because in the military, like, you got to shave every day. So, but my face was so busted up, I was allowed not to shave for a while. So everybody like, what happened to you? What happened to you? My mouth is wired shut. I'm standing there at the barracks, and I'm telling this story while I'm drinking, and it was still just kind of like par for the course. It was just such a normal thing. So fast forward to September 11th, 2001. Our unit is getting ready to do a standard Mediterranean deployment. And then the towers came down. I was in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, when that happened. We heard the first tower go down on the radio, watched the second tower go down on BBC, their website. And it was, technology's changed a lot in the last 20 years. So getting that one website up was difficult. So we saw that happen. We knew we were next in line to deploy. September 18th, we would deploy. We left. We had.
It was that quick? That's pretty.
Yeah, we were already. They call them Marine Expeditionary Units. So we were the next MU that was to deploy. So we were qualified. All the gear was packed. I mean, it was just we were weeks away from deploying normally, because there's a Marine Expeditionary Unit in the Mediterranean all the time, year round. Has been for years. So we were going to do a turnover with the Expeditionary Unit that is already in that theater. So we ended up leaving about a week earlier than we should have because of the events that had taken place. We stopped in Egypt, did a short training op, then went sat in the Indian Ocean. And December 2nd, 2001, we flew into Pakistan. And then from Pakistan, we flew into Kandahar and held Kandahar International Airport for the next 4 months until the Army came in. So that was very, very much at the beginning of the war. We were the first uniformed, non-special operations forces that were in Kandahar after 9/11, in Afghanistan after 9/11.
So when you were deployed, you were in Afghanistan. Were you still drinking?
So no, we did not have the ability to drink in Afghanistan. So that was,
I didn't know if anyone was able to sneak it in or anything like
that. No, we had there was a couple of guys that we had some things, like if you're deployed, if you're on the water for, I forget the time period, but you get like 2 beers every 60 days or 90 days or something. So they would put beer tents on the flight deck and you get your 2 beer rations. So there was a lot of guys that didn't drink. So you're trying to like hustle deals like, hey man, I'll buy your 2, so there were a couple of opportunities there, a couple of guys that snuck in a bottle here or there. So we did drink when we weren't supposed to prior to our deployment. This figure September 18th to December 2nd. If there was anything there that could have been consumed, it was gone. So when we actually went into Kandahar, it was all about business, and pretty much a dry zone until we got back to the States, which would have been early March 2002. I'm sorry, early May 2002.
Were you scared in Afghanistan?
No. No. I think so. Our experience was a lot different than, say, guys that ended up going to the same place 5 years, 10 years later. It was just a different experience. It was new, wasn't a whole lot of politics involved with it. The time of the year played a factor in it because it was cold, it was winter, so a lot of the Taliban forces had kind of hid in the mountainous regions to stay away, because the air campaign was nuts. I mean, we're just dropping bombs, everywhere. So we were pretty safe, and just all of that training, and they everybody's heard the things that people say about Marines and stuff, and we're really just cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. And there was 5,000 of us, so I was probably in the safest place on the planet at that time, around 5,000 very angry Marines that hadn't had the ability to drink a beer in 3 months. You know what I'm saying? So, and I think the first night that we had gotten engaged by the Taliban, there were that's an experience I don't think you'll ever forget, the first time that you get in a gunfight or get surrounded by a gunfight. But you train for certain things, and then when something happens, you just react to it, and you do what you need to do, and you don't ever really think about it again. It's just part of it until years later. I mean, some guys, you see what's happening with guys that were Vietnam era vets, and the lack of care that they had coming back out. They're just now. I met a vet from Vietnam, I think it was like 2 months ago. He had just started counseling. And he had already 5 divorces, and there was just such a different process back then. And even in the beginning of my career, when we got out of Afghanistan and we came home, like I got out, my contract was up, and I signed some papers, I turned in my gear, and I left. They had no plan in place to really kind of transition a service member back out to the civilian world. It was just like, hey, thanks, here's your piece of paper, go. Yeah. That's gotten better now from what I understand. But it took 2 decades of conflict in order to put some processes in place to try to make sure that we're sending veterans back out in the civilian world with the proper care or access to it. So no, long-winded, no, wasn't scared. Wasn't scared. Probably was more scared after I got out, without really having a plan on what I was going to do next. All right, that was probably more scary than being in the middle of a war zone. So I got out in 2002 and got a job, started going to college, picked the bottle right back up again, and found it really difficult to find a place to fit. I was now older than freshman in college, and I'd already been shot at, and I'm sitting in classes with kids that were still living with mom and daddy. Right. We were not the same. And so it was very difficult to try to kind of reintegrate. So it was just, I've always been a hard worker. I went to work for this company, worked my way up, pretty quickly from working in a warehouse to being in sales, and ended up quitting college because I gotten promoted to a place where I was making real good money. I was making 6 figures at 23 years old. And,
what were you doing?
It was sales. I was working for a distribution company, and I just get on the phones, selling our products. And it was a good company. It was a good legit product. It had a specific customer base, and I fell in the routine. It's like if I called this many people, I was going to make this many sales, and it was just routine. And it was good. It was a good experience. so I was, making good money. And I was single, didn't have any kids, bought my first house when I was 24. Had all the toys, had the new truck, had the motorcycle. I was just living life, and lived at the local bars, and was always functioning, man. Like I could drink till 3-4 o'clock in the morning, hit the rack until 6, and get up and get to work and make money I needed to make and handle my responsibilities. And that was just a constant routine. And everybody that I had immersed in my life was all doing the same exact thing. It was so absolute, and it was just normal. And then in 2005, was a guest at a wedding. The wedding had an open bar afterwards at the wedding reception. I took full advantage of that. And when it was time to leave, someone had called me a cab. I would learn later that after about 2 minutes, I was tired of waiting for the cab. I got in my vehicle and I left the venue. I was driving down the street, and after, I don't know, about 10 minutes or so of leaving the venue, I would crash into and total a police car. Didn't realize it was a police car at first. I knew I had hit something, and I had hit it really hard. So I got out of my vehicle and started walking back towards the car that I had hit. And by the time I looked up, there was multiple police officers with guns drawn, and, get on the ground. And, we could talk about, different time, different place. I'm not here to tell the story. So needless to say, I was arrested. There was really no denying, there was an accident. I hit a cop. So I'm pretty much feeling like I was screwed, like this was it. Went in front of the judge the next morning. The public defender came by and was like, "Hey, look, here's your charges. These are your options. What do you want to do?" And the only charge they gave me was for a first offense DUI. Now, considering that what I did, this was, and I said, "Well, what about the accident?" And she looked through the paperwork. She's like, "This is what you got. What do you want to do?" Like, okay, no contest. So I pled no contest, was released. Later that afternoon, I got my driver's license was suspended for 6 months. I had a couple $1,000s in fines that I needed to pay, and I needed to go through, I want to say it was like a year of counseling. I finished everything except for the counseling really soon. I had my license back in 90 days. It was like a slap on the wrist. I did part of the counseling that I had to go. It was expensive. It was very, very expensive. So I was able to go through the VA, and as a combat veteran, I didn't have to pay for it. It was a service that was provided. So the court allowed for that counseling to be, it met the qualifications for the sentencing that I had gotten. So
there was some help that came out of this.
Yes, there was. I went, it was 1 hour a week for 1 year, face to face with a counselor through the VA. And then I went to, I had some minimum requirements to attend like AA and some different, 12-step type programs like that. So I did that for a year, and I was sober for a year, didn't have a drop, didn't really have a desire to drink in that year. I think it was the shock of what had happened and how bad it could have been. I mean, I could have kept a man from going home to his family that night. I hit him hard. If I'd have hit him 3 feet the other way, it would have been an entirely different outcome for him, and maybe even for myself. and it was bad. So, going through the counseling, and that was my real first experience of, the first meeting with the counselor. He asked me the same question you did when you started. And that was more of a statement. He was like, tell me about your childhood. And started unpacking all that stuff. And it was a mess, and we'd go through that. And then, he would see, we got to the part where I was in my teenage years, that I was kind of, I was going to church, and I was involved in people that were in that space and not closing down the bar space. And he was like, why you tell all of these stories? He's like, that is one moment in time where you seem like you got a little bit of joy, you got a little bit of happiness from those memories. He's like, do that again. And so I did, and started, I got back. I'm grown now, so I started going to a local church and was getting involved, and things were good. And I was sober. At a year, I think now we would call it a dry drunk, like at a year, it was okay. I don't want to be that guy anymore. But I want to be normal. I want to be the guy who can go out and have a drink and be normal. That lie that I had gotten in my head. I was like, well, I'll just, I go get a glass of wine. Like, you should be able to drink a glass of wine. I'd stand in the mirror and I would say that to myself, and, the glass would turn into a bottle, and, the bottle would turn. And after a year of sobriety, almost a year to the day, I would find myself in handcuffs again. No cool story with that one. I didn't crash into anything. I didn't use a blinker. I was coming from my 10-year high school reunion, and I didn't use a blinker when I changed lanes. So cop pulled me over. Second DUI within 5 years. There were some other circumstances that were kind of surrounding it. So by the end of it all, it would take everything that I had to avoid going to prison. I was looking at 5 years in prison. That's what the state wanted to give me. I lost my job, so no more good 6-figure job. My driver's license was gone for 5 years. The truck was repoed, house was going to get foreclosed on, motorcycle was going. Everything, every material thing that I had was gone, and I was still kind of waiting for the final sentencing to be done, because I was fully expectant that 5 years, what I was going to get. My really, really expensive attorney was telling me that was probably the best that he was going to be able to get me. And I was sitting in my house, me and a 30-pack of MGD and my pistol. And my intent for that day was to drink enough to where I could numb myself to the pain enough to where I could put a bullet in my head and not have to deal with it anymore. And I was about halfway through that case of beer, and I got a literal knock at my door. And it was a friend of mine. It was one of the guys that I had went to church with as a teenager, who he stopped by randomly, and he says, "Hey man, what are you doing?" And nothing. I'm just hanging out. And he's like, "Well, I heard you've been going through some stuff." And I said, "Yeah, man, I got some problems, it's no big deal. It's going to work itself out." Because clearly I'm not telling him that I need him to go away so I can commit suicide. He's like, "Well, why don't you come with me?" I was like, "Where are we going?" He's like, "Oh, we're going to go to church." And I was like, "No, man, I'm drunk, dude. I've been drinking." He's like, "No, come on. It'll be fine." So he convinces me to go. He saved my life in that moment. And he wouldn't know for years later that that's what he did. He cared enough to come by. He knocked on my door. He didn't take no for an answer. He took me somewhere that I had an encounter with God. I didn't know that if it was genuine, because I was under the influence. So I went back the next day because there was an event. It was 7 days, 7 nights. So I went back the next night and had a very similar encounter with a relatively sober mind. And from that moment on, I was in a better place. I wanted to live. I wanted to be sober. And I started going to, I'm sure you've heard of it, Celebrate Recovery.
Yep.
I started going to Celebrate Recovery. It was kind of a hybrid, but it was, faith-based 12-step program. I started doing that on my own. And then my charges that I had, somehow I went from 5 years in prison to 10 days in county jail. Those 10 days in county jail, I was able to do over the course of 5 weekends. So things just kind of started to line itself up to where it wasn't as bleak as I thought it was. And I just started this process where I'm just going to trust God and leave the things that I thought were normal behind, and just started day by day, one day at a time, just working through the processes and doing the, following the steps and doing the inventories and the spiritual inventory and all those different things to really try to get to a place where, why am I so mad? Why am I so depressed? Like, where is this stuff coming from? And just started unpacking that stuff through several years of real engagement. But I had to get people that were farther along, that had been there, done that I could relate to, that were able to. I've never liked the term sponsor. Like, it just makes me feel like we're like driving NASCARs with, Nabisco on the side of our shirts or something. But I do like friends, and accountability partners are important. And when I started to get those people, that I was able to be open enough to say, you know what, no, I am an alcoholic. Like, I'm a pretty bad alcoholic. My driving record would prove it. But when I was able to speak it and admit it, and able to say, like when I was having a weak moment, I could pick up the phone and I could call somebody and say, hey man, let's go get coffee. Because if I don't go get coffee with you, I'm probably going to the liquor store, and it took a while for those urges to go away. But my focus shifted quickly, but those urges were still there. And the years of just bad habits put in place of things that I would do and how I would cope and all of that, I was able to get people in my life that genuinely cared and that had been there and understood, or helped to, pull me along when I couldn't.
That's great to have community around yourself. We have a program ourselves. We have a 10-step program, and the last step is the same thing as the other programs, which is giving back,
Mm-hmm.
But definitely something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most 12-step programs are written incorrectly. And the 12th step is usually that, because I've had an experience, now I'm going to go out. I think if you're sober today, you've had an experience. So go out and tell somebody about your experiences, good or bad. Because there's a lot of people that don't take a step because they think they're alone. And a lot of the 12-step world has kind of created this place where, hey, you get better. And then when you get better, then go tell somebody about it. And my personal opinion is that is wrong. If you've managed to go 12 hours without a drink or 6 hours without shooting up, that's a story that needs to be told, because a lot of people don't get that opportunity. That's just, sorry, I've got sidetracked for a second, but
No.
I think we need to encourage that as a community of people that are in recovery or have been in recovery. Like, if you're waiting for perfection, like, I don't know what you're waiting for, right? Because we're never going to get perfect in our lives. We're still going to have something that's going to come up. That's going to be a struggle. And a lot of times, especially in that first, 6 months to a year in recovery, we're just trying to learn how to deal with life again. Like if you started drinking at 16 and now you're 36, Like you got 20 years of undeveloped emotional habits that you don't know how to deal with, So if you just sit there and sit back and stay isolated, and that was me, like I was so emotionally immature when I got sober. Now I'm just getting flooded with all of these feelings. Like, what is this? What am I supposed to do with them? Because prior to it was just anger. Like I was either drunk or I was angry. And now you got all these other things coming in, like I was 30 and I was 30 when I had my first drink. When I was 29 is when it really started. 30 was when I had my last drink. And, I'm just so grateful for the people that cared and gave me an opportunity to start leading in the recovery group that I was participating in, and got involved with the church and the men's group that we were in. Because, there's a lot of people, even inside of the faith community, they might do the church thing and they're doing the men's groups and they're doing all of that, but they still got struggles and they still got addictions, and they're just not talking about them. And they maybe they're not resonating themselves like mine did. Mine did with, silver bracelets in the back of a cop car. It was the climax to that story. So to be able to use where I've been to help lead and to help guide, and just to be openly like, hey, yeah, I did a lot of stupid stuff, and I'm here to help and I care. I mean, it's just been a blessing, to be able to do that. So, 14 years later, I've helped start two other recovery programs and two different churches over the last couple of years. I still currently lead one. Now we have between 40 and 50 people in attendance every week. And my phone, it goes off a lot. We got a lot of people that are calling, that are reaching out, just the ramp up of my thing was alcohol, but the opioid addiction, problem in this country is not, I think everybody's affected by it, at least on one level or another. So last year alone, we had, I'm not sure quite if you know what this term is, but we had 7 people Baker acted because they had made comments that they were, suicidal.
Yep.
So like, we just do things like that and just keep pushing forward.
So my last question for you is, do you have any advice for people watching and listening?
The biggest piece of advice that I can give anyone is, one, understand that we're all going to go through something, and you have to ask for help. You have to ask for help. And if you ask and you don't get it, ask somebody else, right? Like the help is there. There are people that care. Sometimes when we start to open up initially, people don't know what to do with it, or they think, I see people all the time, and say, yeah, I used to have a drinking problem. And then I hear about their relationship with alcohol, and their relationship with alcohol is as bad or worse than mine was, but they don't see it as a problem. So if that's who you're going to, like, they're just probably going to blush you off, so it's finding the right people, ask for help. Don't be afraid to keep asking until you find someone that's going to sit you down over a cup of coffee and figure out where you're going through. This is the worst thing that we can do as addicts, as people in recovery or soon to be in recovery, is to isolate and stay alone and just act like this is going to go away, or that it's not a problem. That would be my advice, man.
No, that's some great advice. I appreciate that. So do you have anything else you want to add?
My cliche is, we're looking for progress, not perfection. So like I said earlier, like once you get started on your recovery, and I pray that everybody that is hearing this today is looking for a different way to lead their lives, and that is through the absence of drugs and alcohol. And once you get sober from that drugs and alcohol, and that's what I found, that mine, it resonated with a bottle. My problems were in here. My problems were much deeper than the issues that resulted from the substance. So once you get that substance gone, be willing and be open to really digging into where you've came from, because it may suck, but you're going to be able to use your experiences to help other people in such a tremendous way that right now you can't understand it, but I've been able to do it. Millions of other people have been able to do it. I've started a YouTube channel. I Am Will. And if we ever been to the recovery meeting, that's why I named it the way I named it. I am Will, and I personally don't highlight somebody's addiction, right? Because you are a person, and I believe that you are a person created in the image of God. And you may struggle with drugs or alcohol or depression or sadness or gambling or any of the other multitude of things that us as humans can become addicted to. But at the end of the day, you're still a person that has value and that has purpose. So I Am Will. Find me on YouTube, and I appreciate your time today.
No, I appreciate you hopping on here and doing the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Anytime, man. I got a whole list of folks, man. I'll help you get stacked up.
Yeah, man. Sounds cool. Get them on the calendar.
Absolutely.
All right. For everybody watching and listening, I hope you like what you saw and heard. You could check us out on Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram. You can also find us at www.addicts-anonymous.com. There you'll find a bunch of different types of resources, as well as our approved literature, where we have a ton of articles that are free to read. So that's all I have for today. I hope once again you like what you saw and heard, and until next time.